Hey everyone, thanks for joining us today. Um, Give it one more minute for people to trickle in, and then we'll go ahead and get started. Perfect. Let's go ahead and kick things off. So first of all, I'd love to welcome everyone to Datafold's first hands-on lab. Bear with us if we experience any technical difficulties or anything like that, but we are super excited to share what we've been working on. If you're new to Datafold, Datafold is the fastest way to validate DBT model changes during development and deployment. And today we're going to focus on test-driven development with our open source data-diff and DBT. So just to introduce myself, my name is Will Sweet. I'm the head of data and product experience at Datafold. I was previously director of data at Cypress.io, which builds test automation tools for software engineers. I could see the benefits that better testing brought to software engineering, like speed and confidence, but the work my team was doing on the data side was lacking a lot of that kind of tooling. And without putting a ton of effort in to validate our work, it was hard for us to know the full effect that changes had on downstream data and stakeholders. And that's what brought me to Datafold and why I'm super excited about the topics we're discussing. So just an overview of our agenda. Please join us on DBT Slack. We'll have the link to our channel, which is tools-datafold on the next slide. We'll also give an overview of data testing, including development and deployment testing. We'll go into the hands-on demo with data-diff, and we'll also preview something we've been working on internally that I'm pretty excited about. And then finally, we'll show you how to get started with your own DBT project. So again, we encourage you to join the tools-datafold. We'll be kind of monitoring both that and the chat for the live stream. So if you have any questions, feel free to put them in either. But again, if you have any questions like after the event, tools-datafold is a great place to find my team and the rest of Datafold for support. First, let's talk about data testing. So we kind of see data testing break into two parts. There's the development part of data testing, which is really focused on the individual, and the deployment part of testing, which is focused on the team. Development happens kind of far left in this process when you're actively working on models. And development tests are the test and validation steps that you take to inform that work to basically kind of see if you're doing the right things as you go along. And if you follow Datafold for a while, you might have heard of us associated with CI or continuous integration. Deployment testing happens here during this phase, which we kind of think towards the end of the process, right before you deploy to production. And development testing, in this sense, embeds those tests directly within the pull request or the merge request. You might have DBT tests that you run as you do your pull requests or merge requests. And the point of development testing is really to help share context created during development with the PR reviewer, helping them understand the code changes that you've made, as well as the impact on the downstream artifacts. But today we're really focused on development testing. So again, creating that context while you're going through as an individual doing your work building models. So I'd love to start with a quick question. How do you currently check your work? Are you doing nothing, just kind of committing and pushing straight to production? Are you writing ad hoc queries like this, where you might be kind of making assertions to decide if things are null or not or unique? Are you doing some of these accepts to try to figure out what's in one table but not another? Do you write DBT tests? So do you actually like step out of your workflow, go into your schema YAML files and write these tests as you go to make assertions? Do you use other methods like DBT expectations? Or do you dump to like a spreadsheet, which I think I kind of hesitate to admit I've done this before, but it's a pretty gnarly way. And I think if you've ever worked with a finance team, maybe one of the ways you've collaborated with them. But when presented with a change like this, it's hard to know the effect a code change will have on the data. And since the data is dynamic, sometimes you don't really know what's right or not right until you see it. And that's what makes it really hard to write static tests like unit tests where you're asserting against specific values. And that's why, as a team, and personally, I'm so bullish on the concept of data-diff. So, what is data-diff? Well, similar to a code diff like this, it's the difference between two objects, a comparison of the before, what's on the left, and the after, what's on the right. But in the case of data, it's a comparison of the data being created by the code. So the before left is the code that's currently powering production, and that's what's in our prod version of our dim orgs model. Whereas the right, the after, is the code that we're currently working on in development. And notice how in this example, we're swapping the signed in table for the org created model, and also adding in a couple new columns like org name and employee range. These are those underlying tables that we would see from that code in our database. So again, the prod version on the left, the dev version on the right. And notice that the shape of the dev table is changed relative to prod because we've included additional columns like we saw on the last slide. Now with data diff, what we're really doing is we're stitching those two tables together to get a cell by cell comparison. And that makes it much easier to spot the differences between the two tables, like the values added, deleted, or updated. And that's the real difference here is it can really just help you see those things that you might not have caught otherwise. So now we're going to dig into a hands-on demonstration with our open source tool, data-diff and DuckDB. Before we move on, I want to give a quick shout out to Doug Beatty of DBT Labs for contributing to our repo and adding DuckDB support, as well as helping us with this demonstration. So first of all, these are the prereqs for following along. Just to be sure you don't run into any issues, we recommend that you have these installed. If you don't have all these installed or you run into an issue on the way, again, feel free to ping us in Slack or the chat. But you can also just follow along and watch and without having to run this locally, and then we can help you set up afterward if you have any questions. One kind of caveat here is that DBT Cloud IDE is not currently supported. It's why we call out the local development IDE. Like in my case, I'm using VS Code to show you today. The reason why is it's actually a limitation on the DBT side where they only support DBT commands and not other Python packages like data-diff. So that's something we'll be working with them to try to see if we can collaborate on in the future. I will also note that you can use this with DBT Cloud, but you have to have a local setup. So you can also configure your project locally and use VS Code. So DBT Cloud is not a limitation other than just the IDE won't actually run the commands. All right, so before we jump in, if you want to check your DBT version, your Python 3 version, or Git, you can run those commands at the top to check those. If you're pretty confident, you can go ahead and clone the repository as you see here. I'll have the team post that link into the chats as well so that you can quickly get into it. What you're going to want to do is you're going to want to clone that one locally, CD, basically navigate into that repo, and then check out the DuckDB demo branch of that repo. So if you follow those 3 commands, you should be there in a couple of minutes. And while y'all all get set up, I'm actually going to transition over into VS Code. So I'll stop sharing my screen and I'll jump back over into VS Code and share again. So as you can see, I'm already in the DuckDB demo branch. And so I can go ahead and get started. I'll give people a couple more seconds to clone the repo and get into the branch. Again, feel free to post any comments in either Slack or chat. The team should be monitoring those. And again, if you fall behind, we've already posted the kind of full script that we're going to be following. It's a link to the DuckDB demo README. It has all the steps. And so I'll try my best to keep them on screen as much as possible. But sometimes the printouts kind of take over, and you'll be able to like see those in that script as well in the README. Perfect. So the first thing I'm going to do once I get in here is I'm actually going to create a virtual environment for us to work in. The real benefit to this is it's a good best practice to make sure that you don't actually overwrite some of the like basically files or dependencies that you would need. So if you install certain packages, certain versions for a separate project, a virtual environment inside of another project will keep you from maybe having conflicting versions. So if you're working on multiple projects, that can be super useful. So I'll go ahead and create that virtual environment here, and then I will activate it. So the source environment activate, this command will spin it up, and you'll see my command, or you'll actually see like in the terminal this change with the env. And then I'm going to pip and like just make sure my pip is upgraded properly, just to make sure we're all on the same page. And I know watching someone type in commands is a little like watching paint dry, so I appreciate you staying with us. Want to make it as authentic as possible. And once I run this pip install command to upgrade pip, I'll be on the same page, and I can run and install my requirements. So basically everything besides the Python, Git, and DBT requirements, everything else is already baked into the repo like DuckDB. So if we install these, you'll actually have everything you need to work with. So basically we freeze these into a pip requirements document. You can actually go into the repo and check this out and see what it all comes with. But if you run this command, we'll just install everything we need to get started. So I'll go ahead and do that, and we'll wait for all these to roll in. So it takes a couple seconds, and we're done. So I'll clear off my terminal just to make it a little bit more easy to read the new commands that I write. And hopefully I'll give you a couple of seconds to catch up. So the next thing we'll do is basically think of this as having like a completely blank database. So again, DuckDB is like our Snowflake database we have in the cloud, but it's actually running locally on our laptops. This file will be present inside of this repo locally. So you'll actually be able to see something called like DuckDB demo DuckDB, and that's the database that we're creating. So what we need to do to start is actually seed our production version of the table. So to do that, we'll run a dbt build command where we will do a full refresh like this, but we're going to target prod, and that will basically just tell us we're going to build our production versions of these tables. Again, we've already set up the profiles for you locally, and that's actually what this profiles directory flag at the end is basically like dbt kind of made a change a couple minor versions ago, where instead of locally like looking at your root of your local user, they can look at it might look at the profiles file inside of your repo that you have locally. We're basically just putting this flag here to make sure it looks at the profiles.yaml file in this repo, because we've already set it up for you. So you won't encounter any errors if you've kind of tried to push your profile to look at, say the one that's in your local user on your computer. So in doing this, we can make sure we all use the same versions. Oh, sorry, I missed one command, which basically after you run the pip install, you actually have to source activate again, and that will make sure we're spun up. So I'll go ahead and run the profiles again. Again, yeah, don't forget, once you do pip install requirements, you need to reactivate the source so that way you're taking advantage of all the stuff that you've just like downloaded locally. So now once I reran that dbt build command with the full refresh to prod, you can see that we've started creating all the production versions of this table. So the target is prod. We've created all the tables. We've run our tests that we've added. And we've also seeded 5 tables as well. So this is kind of the extent of our production database. So next I'm going to want to do the same thing, but I'm actually going to not target prod. I'm going to target dev. So in our case, that's the default version here. So if I don't have a target flag, it'll just run on dev. You could also just switch prod to dev, and we'll run this again. Perfect. So now we have both our production version of this data seeded and our development version of the data seeded. And that will basically give us kind of what you would probably experience in your own Snowflake environment where you have kind of everything set up locally. So what we're going to do next, we're actually going to make a change in one of these models. And we've already teed up that change here, as you can see. We're going to comment out this portion for dev, and we'll also comment this one for prod, and we'll save that. Make sure you save the file. I can't tell you how many times I've done that where I've made a change, not saved, rerun dbt, and been surprised when nothing happens, only to find that I have that little bubble at the top that tells me I haven't saved the file yet. So once we do that, we'll switch back to our terminal, and we will run a dbt run command. And this time we're going to target just one of the models, dimorgs. We're going to pass in that profiles directory again. What this gives us is, again, we're targeting our profile to use that DuckDB profile we've set up. And we're going to run for the dimorgs model, just that one. And we're also going to add on a data-diff command. So you could do this separately. You could do this dbt run first, and then you do your data-diff dbt run next. But we're going to do it all as one command. Notice that in order to do that, we have added, this to ampersands. Basically, that tells us we're going to be stitching on another command, another Python library command that'll be running afterwards. We have this db-dbt flag that tells data-diff that we're going to be working with dbt models. And then similar to the profiles directory flag here on dbt, we have our own dbt profiles directory flag. This one only uses a period, not a period slash, to tell us again locally that we're going to use the profile that exists in this project. So if I run that, you'll see 2 things happen. The first one is you'll see dbt runs the model itself. And the next you'll see that data-diff runs immediately afterward and produces an output like this. So when dbt runs, it does the same thing as before. It's creating the table. It's putting it at dev.dimorgs. And then basically what data-diff is doing, it's picking up off the last dbt run and basically comparing it to what we know to be production. So in this case, you can see that where data-diff has picked up that we've added 2 columns, which we did, as the same we saw earlier. We added org name and employee range. We've also removed 11 rows in our development version of the table. Maybe that's not something I expected. To be honest, it's not something I think I would have expected. And we've also updated 112 rows. And all 112 of those updates happen to be created at values. So I'm starting to quickly get an idea of something that has happened that I might not have anticipated, making what seems like a pretty simple change. And so this is the power of just this dbt flag and data-diff is odds are I would have had to write a couple of queries to figure this out to start. And now I basically have a good idea of what I want to look at next. So before we move forward and trying to figure out this piece right here and what's changed and why, I'm going to show you something else that we can do, which is that same command that we ran before. We can also add on the plus syntax that dbt offers to tell us that we're going to select the dimorgs model and everything downstream. And basically, we can run that exact same command, and it will also run dbt for the dimorgs and all the downstream tables. and data-diff will pick up and run on every single one of those tables as well. So if I run that, you'll see we run a few more models this time, and data-diff kicks off and is immediately running on all of these downstreams. So again, that same kind of high-level summary information that tells me what I'm looking at is populated here. And one thing I want to call out is the changes that this model has had on downstream models. So my fact monthly financials model now has one fewer row. That is something I probably didn't anticipate. And if I don't figure that out, my finance team might be a little upset. And then this sales sync model has also been affected. 2 rows were removed. 2 were unchanged, but 2 were removed. And again, this is something I know that my sales team works off of, and that won't be really great if I, maybe nuke half of their leads for the month. They probably won't be too happy. So that's it right now for this hands-on demonstration. What I'm going to work on, what I'm going to show you next is something that you won't necessarily be able to follow along with because it's something we're still working on, but it's starting to answer that next question. So what we've kind of shown here is this data-diff --dbt command will give us a lot of like the real meaty information that we want to dive into almost immediately. But it doesn't necessarily give us the what happened or maybe more granularity to understand the change. So what I'm going to transition to next is actually something we're working on with a free version of our cloud product to actually give that. And the reason why we transition to the cloud is, as you'll see, it gives us a little bit better UI to interact with this data as opposed to having a printout in our CLI. So in order to do that, I just remember to deactivate your environment. So as you can see, we've deactivated from our environment. I encourage you to do that anyway. I'm going to git stash these changes so that way I don't get a conflict when I transition back over. And I'm going to switch to a different branch that actually works with our Snowflake database that we have for this demo project. So in order to do that, I'll get checkout will-dev. Again, you won't be able to follow along with this, but we think it's pretty cool. So one thing to note is as I've switched branches, data-diff, if I reran the command right now, it's still going to pick up on my last run, which was against DuckDB. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to rerun the DBT model or DBT on the DimOrgs model. So this time I only have to do this. So DBT run selecting DimOrgs. The reason why I don't have to do the profiles directory is I'm actually going to use my profile that I have set up and my personal like user root access. So again, this is something that you won't necessarily have to deal with the profile when you set up locally. You can basically make it where you don't have to pass that in every single time. So now I've set this up and I'm going to now run data-diff. So to show off the fact that we can do this as separate commands, I'm basically going to run this as its own command, and it will still pick up off the last run that we had. And as you notice, we, instead of like putting a printout here, we've kind of given you a link to our application where you can kind of dive into the results. We're going to be trying to update this to put that same summary information in here. But we view this as right now, you can just throw on the cloud flag if you want to dive in a little deeper. So because of the weirdness with transitioning between screens, I'm actually going to pull down my screen share and then go back into the browser to show you what this looks like. So bear with me a second. Perfect. So when I click this, that link that we last saw, it pops me into a page that looks like this. So this gives us a lot more information than we had before. We can see that what's on the left is our production version. What's on the right is our development version. In production, we have 157 rows. In development, we only have 146. So that's that 11 rows that we saw that we're missing. And we also have the value changes of 112 rows that have been updated. So a couple things I get here. I can look at the schemas tab to see the 2 different columns that were added. So again, org name and employee range. I can look at the primary keys to actually understand what 11 rows are missing from my development. And I'm starting to form a hypothesis looking at this. So again, I'm getting more information that I might have to typically write a query for to like understand what went missing. I can get this pretty much instantly and start seeing that all the orgs that are missing are seemingly sequentially the original orgs. So orgs 1 through 11. And that's starting to set off a little bit of alarm bells. It's making me wonder that if we switch to that org created event, the event that explicitly tells me when an org was created, whereas previously we were using signed in. And if you noticed in the code, we were inferring that by having like a min value of a created at column. Maybe that org created event was actually not instrumented at the outset. And so that's why these orgs are missing. So I'm starting to form some hypotheses here. I also know how to solve this pretty easily, which is that I'm going to add this data back into the original table or add another seed file that will put this back in. And I should be okay to like have this information. I might not know the actual created at dates, but I can definitely add this back in with this information, or I can go ask my team if we have any idea where that information came from. So that helps me solve the problem of the missing data. And if I go to values tab, I can also solve or answer at least a couple questions about why the created at shifted so much and why 112 rows were updated. And so here you can see, again, prod is on the left, dev is on the right. And in the case of this second one, you can see that our dates have shifted backwards, which kind of makes sense when you think about it. The org created event typically happens before a signed in event. If someone creates their org, they usually have a session associated with them, and they won't have to sign in until that session expires, which would probably happen a little bit of time after they originally created their organization. And so in switching from one to the other, we actually will go backwards in time with our created at because the org was naturally created at before the first time they would have to sign in. And so this is giving me much more context for some of those downstream changes. There's nothing about this that sets off alarm bells. The new version is actually more correct in that it is the explicit created at timestamp for this organization, but that could have knock-on effects downstream. And if we jump back in and kind of look at a screenshot of something we were looking at earlier, which is the printout that we had for our sales sync, you could see that, okay, 2 rows were removed. And if we look at the code, I can see that we're asserting on certain timestamps within this where clause, and the created at date being greater than this date minus 60 days. So we're basically at November 1st, 2022, we're looking for orgs that were created within 60 days. And if our timestamps for created at are shifting backwards, that might be why 2 orgs went from having a created date within that 60-day span to not having, now they're having one outside of that 60-day span, and they're no longer in this. What that tells me is I don't necessarily have to worry about this being a long-term issue, because it's something that as we made this change now, it's affected these orgs and it probably won't crop up in the future. But I should definitely be alerting my sales team to the fact that, hey, you're going to be missing these 2 leads. You should still reach out to them anyway. They fit the old criteria, but not the new one. You should be good moving forward. So again, from the context of being able to like work with downstream stakeholders and understand the impact, I have a much better idea of what I'm doing here. So that's it for our hands-on portion and the preview of the -- cloud flag, which we're really excited about. Keep an eye out and let us know if you're interested in getting into an early beta of that feature. We'd love to work with you and your team. Again, that's a free version of the Datafold cloud that we'll be offering to a company that we just looked at the CLI and thought it just wasn't quite giving us what we wanted to, and having that interactivity was going to be key to having a much better experience to diving in and quickly diagnosing issues. So with that, I'll quickly walk through how to get started with your own DBT project. So again, you won't necessarily have to include some of the things that we've done in this data, like this DuckDB version where you had to explicitly point to a profile. You'll probably have all that set up locally. So if you're not doing that when you're running DBT all the time, you won't have to do it with us. We'll basically piggyback on the default behavior that you've set up for DBT. And it only requires 3 steps: installing data-diff, configuring your DBT project, and doing a run with -- dbt. So installing, just wanted to put this here because I'm going to call out the databases that we currently support. So we support Snowflake, BigQuery, Redshift, Postgres, Databricks, and DuckDB. Uh, we'll have a link to the documentation where you can quickly grab the specific commands for your database. So in this case, you're downloading data-diff and a connector for Snowflake, similar like dbt requires you to download a connector. So this would be different for each of these. Check out the documentation if you're using BigQuery, Redshift, something like that to get to know exactly what you need to do for those. And then next, configuring your project. So there's a couple of things that we require to get up and running. We have, again, more documentation on the specifics, but there's different ways you can set up your DBT project. We've tried to mimic the defaults that DBT has as much as possible. But if you've kind of set up a custom way of materializing, say you're using a production database and you're using databases to distinguish between like prod and dev, we can work with that. Same with schemas or even custom schemas. Again, our documentation has much more details and actually examples on, what you need to set up for your, configuration. And then the last thing is we require primary keys to be tagged. And this is actually how we stitch together those tables. So it's pretty easy to add those. You just go into your schema YAML file and you use DBT's tags and then add primary key below the name of the column. So if this was my ID column, I would just add tags and primary key to the bottom, and I'd be up and running in no time. If you happen to run a model that doesn't have a primary key tag setup, we'll let you know in the CLI printout, and you should be well informed as to what model you need to update. And then lastly, you just do a run. So this is similar to what we were looking at before. DBT run, selecting a model and data-diff. And again, you can do it as separate commands as well. You can also add in that plus sign to diff downstream models. And if you're interested in learning more, this is a link to our documentation. I highly encourage you to go check it out. It has, again, much more examples, higher fidelity information there, especially if you're using, non-Snowflake like Redshift. We have a specific tab. You can see exactly what you need there. You can also scan this QR code and get dropped into it. If you have any questions, don't hesitate to reach out to our team in tools-datafold, or send us an email, join, you have a link to the demo repo, create an issue, anything like that. Also, data-diff is open source. So if you want to get involved, I encourage you to check it out. Open issues there, or if you're interested in contributing, we can help you get up and running. Last but not least, I want to thank the product experience team at Datafold. That's Dan, Kyle, and Leo. They're the moderators for today, so you've probably seen them be pretty active in the chat. They've also been a huge help in getting not only this presentation together, but also helping put together the DBT command for open source. It was kind of a love letter from our team, and the fact that we just wanted this for ourselves to help our work go faster. And we decided to make it open source to embrace the community and everything that DBT has also given us. Also want to thank Doug Beatty again. Not only did he add the DuckDB support, as I mentioned, but he also gave us a pretty nice skeleton for this presentation that we adapted for an internal demo database. And I also want to thank the rest of the Datafold team for their contributions, helping us get some of the stuff put out. And as well as thank everyone here for joining this live stream, suffering through watching paint dry of writing out stuff in a terminal. I hope you found it really useful. And with that, we'd love to answer any questions you have in the chat or tools-datafold channel. And with that, I want to say, again, thank you so much for joining us, bearing with us in this first virtual hands-on lab. Please let us know if you have any feedback, good or bad. We're trying to learn from this and get better at this and get better at what we're building and making it better for you. So again, don't hesitate to reach out. I'm going to leave this up for a minute and we'll stay in the chat for a little bit as you have questions. But you won't have to hear my voice or see my face anymore. But again, just want to say thank you so much and look forward to interacting with you and helping you get set up with data-diff. Thanks.